Hello everyone. Thank you very much for your kind attention this afternoon. My name is Brendan O Corraidhe, and today's class is on how to plan and teach a class. It's a bit of a busman's holiday for me because this is actually what I do for a living, is teach teachers how to teach. So no pressure. I guess I better deliver. The format is I'm going to talk and share my screen and kind of run through the handout that I have available. I have pasted the link to the handout in the chat. You don't have to follow along. It is there for your future reference. One of the things we'll talk about is handouts and the potential that they have to distract your audience because your audience is reading the handout instead of paying attention to your presentation. So, but it's there for your reference. I will post it again later. If you have questions, please put them in the chat, and I will break periodically and we'll look at the chat and see if there are questions to be dealt with. But I'm not going to stop in the middle of the presentation and ask a pop-up question. In fact, I'm going to close the chat so it doesn't even distract me. So, what are we going to talk about? Let me share my screen here. Share. All right. Hopefully everybody is seeing this Google document, How to Plan and Teach a Class, Brendan O Corraidhe, Winter Rum 2022. What are our learning objectives for today? When you walk away from this class, I hope that you will be able to state the components of a measurable learning objective. Explain Gagne's events of instruction. Describe Bloom's taxonomies and their utility. Describe the levels of Fauché's folly. Describe the key aspects of different kinds of classes, and describe different kinds of handouts, their characteristics and benefits. That's what I plan to cover today. So, as I said, I do this for a living. I have a bachelor's and a master's degree in education. I have been a professional instructional designer for over 30 years. For the last 22 years, I have worked in higher education, teaching college professors how to teach more effectively using technology, helping them to design their classes. So I live and breathe this stuff. I'd like you to think about classes you have taken, both in and out of the SCA. I know you've taken a lot of classes. Many of you have advanced degrees. Some of you may have doctorates, more education than I do. So you've had a lot of classes. You've even had a lot of classes today already, I imagine, some of you. And some of them were good, and some of them were okay. And frankly, some of them were probably a waste of your time. So as we go through the material today, think back on those good and awful classes and see if you can connect the dots to where those classes either did the things that we're talking about or utterly failed to do them, which is why possibly the class stunk so bad. So we're going to start with some foundations. Measurable learning objectives. A fellow by the name of Mager a number of years ago came up with a very simple ABCD formula for writing measurable learning objectives. Now, before we get into that, why is it important to have a measurable learning objective? Well, the reason is that you want to be able to know whether the learners, the people that came to your class, actually learned anything. And in order for you to be able to know whether they learned something, they have to be able to do something that you can observe, that you can measure. If you have something like, the learner will appreciate 14th century clothing. Appreciation. That happens inside their head. You can't tell whether they're appreciating it or not. Or the student will understand X, Y, or Z. You can't tell if they understand X, Y, or Z because that's happening inside their head. You can't see that. But if they do something, if they perform some action, if they make a panannular brooch, if they write a sonnet, if they write a scroll in Celtic Unseal, you can observe that and you can see that they did it. Now, in my day-to-day world of higher education, this is critically important, and we spend a lot of time and a lot of effort measuring what the students can do. In the SCA world, not so much, except when it comes to safety, especially in martial arts, because being able to safely throw a blow or safely operate on the archery range, that's very, very important. But typically, if you're teaching a class in how to write sonnets, in how to design 14th century Norse or Renaissance Italian garb, if you're just presenting information that you have learned and you just want to share, measuring the student's knowledge isn't necessarily important. However, and we'll get to this in a little bit, there's a thing called the testing effect, which research shows really, really is very real, and that is this. If you take a test over something that you have just learned, your odds of retaining that long term go up exponentially. If you take a quiz over material that you have just learned, you're going to learn it better. So that's why I like to stop and ask a question. For example, just type in the chat, what is the testing effect? Feel free to type in. I'm not going to be giving grades or anything like that. But the act of recalling the thing that you just learned, we think neurologically, creates stronger neurological pathways between long-term and short-term memory, deep storage. It helps this bit of knowledge get connected to that bit of knowledge. And so even as you are trying to learn something yourself, give yourself a quiz as you're studying something. Take advantage of the testing effect. So, measurable learning objectives. Well, what are they? A, B, C, D. Audience, behavior, condition, degree. Audience, behavior, condition, degree. Audience. Who are you talking to? Who's going to do this deed that you've explained how to be done? What do they already know? And that's important. The prerequisites. What do you expect your audience to know when they come into your class? If this is not a beginner's class where there's no prerequisites and, yeah, hey, you don't have to know anything at all about this, I'm just going to share this information. If you're expecting students to understand what mattering is, if you're expecting them to know what a roving is, be explicit about that when you start to plan out your class so that you can let your audience know in advance what they need to bring, either physically or most importantly, mentally. So, Duke Eichbrander has got these great videos on spear technique. Well, you probably ought to be an authorized fighter and maybe even authorized in spear because he is operating at this level, not at 001. So think about the prerequisites, the audience. What does the audience bring to your class? That's A. B, behavior. What will they do? What observable and measurable thing will they be able to do in class? If it's an embroidery class where you're teaching basic stitches, you're going to walk around and you're going to see if they're able to do a chain stitch. So you'll be able to measure that. You'll be able to observe that. You'll be able to give the student feedback on, that's almost right, but here's what you could do to make it better. So behavior, and we'll talk about feedback. C, condition. Given what, constrained by what? So given a lucette and yarn or string, the student will be able to thread the lucette and create a couple of inches of cord. But they have to have a lucette. They have to have some yarn. So thinking about the conditions under which your learners will perform the task will give you clues as to what you need to bring in terms of kits. So a number of years ago, I did a class, it was a demonstration class on hand sewing leather. And so as a kit, I provided some linen thread, some artificial sinew, some needles, some beeswax, some boar bristle, some shoemaker's code, and a little Ziploc bag that they could take away from a little kit, because we were going to use all of those materials in the course of the class. So under what conditions will the learner perform the task? So it's A, B, C, D, degree. How will you decide how well the job is done? In the college world, we give grades, right? I am a big fan of rubrics, and a rubric is like a grid where the rows are the different elements of the task. So if I'm going to teach you how to write documentation, is the writing free of grammatical errors? Is it well organized? Are your sources cited? And then the columns of the grid are how well this is done. Either it's not done at all, or it's done absolutely perfectly, and how many shades of gray in between how fine do you want to divide things? So, pop quiz time, put in the chat, what are the ABCDs of measurable learning objectives? We'll take 15 seconds and let you respond if you choose to. Okay, so let's look at some examples of measurable learning objectives. A member of the general populace, that's the audience. Now, oftentimes when you're writing objectives, you will assume the audience, and that's perfectly okay. Very often in my world, we know who the audience is because they are a first semester student or a third semester student, or so we can just kind of assume those sorts of things. I work a lot with the nursing department, and so, when we're looking at objectives for, fourth semester nursing students, we have a pretty good idea of what they ought to know already. And frankly, a lot of those objectives are dictated from above by accrediting boards, but that's my world. For us in the SCA, think about who your audience is. So a member of the general populace will, when prompted, name 5 different herbs and correctly state their properties without referring to the handout. So I took an herb class back in the before times, and I know that lavender and calendula and chamomile are all relaxing. I know that licorice soothes the throat. I know that peppermint soothes the stomach and can be relaxing, and that chamomile, licorice, and peppermint go really well together in a tea. Okay? I learned something. And we can measure the fact that I learned something. An authorized rapier fighter will safely and correctly use a buckler to block 4 standard attacks in a sparring bout. Okay? Who's the audience? Authorized rapier fighter. Not newcomer putting on a fencing mask for the first time. An authorized rapier fighter, because this is not an entry-level class. Safely and correctly use a buckler, so that's the condition. I have a buckler. I can't perform the task if I don't have a buckler. To block 4 standard attacks. So, going to be able to block that attack, this attack, this attack, that attack, whatever they are. I'm not a rapier fighter, I'm making it up. But I'm not doing something fancy, no flippy twist thing. I'm not asking, that's not what I'm expecting them to do. for standard attacks. And under what conditions? In a sparring bout. It's one-on-one, not melee. Makes a difference. If I'm teaching melee techniques, then I have to set up a melee in order to be able to teach that skill, give feedback on that skill, measure that skill, and assess that skill. Audience, behavior, condition, degree. Given a lucette, several yards of yarn or string, illustrated instructions, and one-on-one coaching. So there's the condition. I'm giving them a tool, I'm giving them some materials, I'm giving them illustrated illustrations, and I'm there to help. Remember, the general populace, there's the audience, will correctly thread the lucette and produce at least 1 inch of cord. And so there's my degree. Correctly thread the lucette, produce 1 inch of cord. Okay. Any questions about measurable objectives? If you put a question in the chat, please raise your hand. I'm trying to see if I can look at the chat at the same time. Oh, I see there's a bunch of stuff. Audience, behavior, condition, degree, audience, behavior, condition, degree, testing effect, very good. All right, anybody have any questions? Put your camera on and wave your hand. Otherwise, we will go ahead and continue. Okay, very good. All right, so let's talk about Gagne's events of instruction.
I'm waving my hand.
Oh, sorry, I can't see you.
It took me a while to push all the buttons.
Ah, yes.
I teach culinary classes where we do hands-on cooking. That's very measurable. I also teach culinary history classes. So I'm not sure how I can get to that D mark to know what people have understood or absorbed.
Okay.
I do allow people to ask questions in the class.
In the culinary class, if the dish is edible.
No, that class I'm not worried about because we're right there. Okay. We're cooking together as a group, tasting, stirring, right. Chopping.
Got it.
The history class.
The history. Lecture. Well, you could give a quiz at the end. Or you could observe them later on and see if they decide to be steward of a feast that has a historical theme that you taught them about, which is kind of this laurel-y thing that we do. Or you could just not worry about it, frankly.
Okay. Yeah, generally I don't worry about it, but I do get feedback from the questions they ask. So thank you.
Yes, exactly so. All right, back to screen sharing. So sometimes this doesn't matter so much. Sometimes it does. Very often in my world of instructional design, the correct answer is it depends. So Robert Gagne was a researcher down, I believe, at the University of Florida back a few decades ago. I know he's retired. I'm not sure if he's still living. But he was very influential in the last half of the last century. And he published this paper on events of instruction. What he did was he observed a lot of really good teachers that had really good reputations, and he just observed them and watched what they did and kind of boiled it down into 9 steps that good teachers do, most of them instinctively.
Excuse me.
And
you're not showing your outline anymore. You're showing a list of classes that are being taught today.
Oh, that's bizarre. That's very bizarre. Okay, so we can see Gagne's events of instruction.
Yep,
All right.
we got it.
Okay,
Yes.
very good. All right, so Robert Gagne was a researcher down at the University of Florida. He spent a lot of time observing good teachers and figuring out how they did what they did. And he organized all of that, boiled it down into 9 steps that, when deliberately applied to the design of a class, work to create a good experience for the students. So, first, gain their attention. Second, inform the students of the objectives. Stimulate recall of prior learning. Remind them of what they already know. Present the content. Provide learning guidance. Elicit performance, that is, practice. Give them an opportunity to practice, which involves making mistakes, and you provide feedback to the student. Then you assess their performance and enhance retention and transfer. So, gain attention. You've probably heard stories of chemistry professors that like blow something up at the beginning of class, or spray the students with foam in the front row or something like that. Anything to get the students' attention. It can simply be, good morning. My name is Brendan, and we're going to be talking about this today. It can be simple, it doesn't have to be fancy. But call the room to order at a bare minimum. Inform students of the objectives. There's an old saying in military training, tell them what you're going to tell them, and then tell them what you told them. So what are we going to be covering today? Don't just launch into the content. Give them a mental structure of the various chunks of stuff that you're going to be talking about. And we'll talk about chunking. Stimulate recall of prior learning. I did that at the beginning of class. Think about classes that you have taken. Some good, some okay, some really, really ugly. So you bring that to mind, and I could talk for 20 minutes about schemata theory and why we think that works from a neurological standpoint. But we know that it works when you get the students to remember what they already know, because they are not blank slates. They come into your class already knowing something about the topic, even if they may have only seen a picture or they have a vague interest in it. So stimulate recall of what they already know. For example, if it's a clothing class, you might remind them of a related style of clothing, just to bring something to mind. Right, then you're going to present the content. And it may be a demonstration, it may be a slideshow, you may be handing out samples, but whatever it is, and you may just be talking. Whatever it is, you present the content. Provide learning guidance. You might give them a handout to fill out while you are discussing, or while you are going through your presentation. You might give them the opportunity to practice doing the thing. And then you're going to elicit performance. You're going to have them practice doing it. Now, in a class that is a lecture on culinary history, not a whole lot of practice other than maybe give a little pop quiz. Okay, so who was Scoppy and why is he a big deal? So I had did a penannular brooch class with Ike Brander and Silverthorne, and so we actually like made penannular brooches. Provide feedback, and we'll talk about feedback because it's kind of an important thing. Assess their performance, and very often there's two kinds of assessments. There's formative assessment and summative assessment. A formative assessment, and especially in the context of a college class, is as you go along. So it's a chapter quiz. It's as we're going along, we're going to stop and kind of check your understanding to this point. The summative assessment is kind of like the final exam, the final project, the capstone course, where you're going to put it all together and see if you can assemble all the pieces. But regardless, assessing performance is important. And letting the students know in advance that there's going to be an assessment is really critical. So that's why I told you in advance. We're going to stop and you little pop quizzes in the chat. There's no final exam, so you don't have to worry about that, but just kind of be tracking as we go along. And then enhancing retention and transfer. And that means explaining how they can then take this and apply it to their other things. Better yet, ask the students, so now that you know this, what do you think you might do with this knowledge? How might this change the way that you go about things? So maybe somebody has decided, hey man, I really want to go down the rabbit hole of Renaissance Italian costume design. And so maybe you say, okay, that's great. You might want to focus a little bit because that's really broad in and of itself, believe it or not. So let's maybe make a date to touch base later if you have somebody that's really on fire about things. But the point is help the students to understand where this fits in with everything else that they know now that you know all this new stuff. So some examples. So my introduction, I gained your attention, I stimulated recall, told you about the objectives. Now I'm actually presenting the content. And if this were a workshop, I would be having you write objectives for your class. I would have you prepare a lesson plan. I would have you prepare handouts. We are under some time constraints, so we can't really do that. So Ike Brander and Silverthorne had a penannular brooch class, and I actually got to make a penannular brooch from scratch. I mean, starting from round copper wire, and every step of the way they would give me feedback and, okay, all right, now do this, now do that. In lecture classes, we typically don't have exams, but I'm a big fan of pop quizzes. So for example, just type in the chat, what are the basic steps of Gagne's events of instruction? You don't have to do them all, just kind of a general, a few of them. Give that a few seconds. Get attention, recall learning. There we go. I think somebody has got the handout up on their screen and they copied and pasted. That's okay. That's acceptable for this. So questions about Gagne's events of instructions. I see everybody, several people have typed in the chat. Very good. Okay. So now let's talk about feedback. Feedback really does merit a discussion of its own. Feedback can be defined as the natural or artificial consequence of performance, whether that performance is successful or unsuccessful. So if you fail to block the rap shot, your butt will get immediate natural feedback. But most of the time, we need to build feedback in the same way that we build practice into the class. And you want to be deliberate about providing feedback and deliberate about providing practice. If you do that, your class will be better. I have taken classes that were supposed to be hands-on classes and we got absolutely no feedback about whether we were doing it right or wrong, and it was very frustrating. My son took a calculus class, and the instructor didn't look at the homework. And on the first exam, my son got a very poor score because he had been making a fundamental error and didn't know it and didn't have the chance to correct it because he didn't get any feedback. And that was very frustrating to him. So when you have the luxury of having practice and feedback, and it depends on the format of the class, how much time you have, be deliberate about providing opportunities for students to practice, make errors, and learn from those errors. So is a feedback in step 7 feedback from teacher to pupil or pupil to teacher on the presentation? No, it's feedback from the teacher to the student on their performance. Feedback from students to instructors is a whole separate topic. The timeliness of feedback is important. There's a great video, and I can't find it anymore because it was on somebody's personal blog. But essentially, the guy took his, 7, 10-year-old son, blindfolded him, put a trash can at the end of the hallway, and had him throw wads of paper into the trash can. And so the first segment of the video has the kid throwing like 3-4 wads of paper at the trash can. And of course, he's blindfolded, so he misses the trash can pretty much every time. And the video cuts, and then you hear the dad's voice saying, okay, yesterday when you were practicing throwing wads of paper at the trash can, your first throw was pretty far to the left. Your second throw was pretty far to the right. Your third throw was close, but it was still to the left. So, is that kind of feedback very useful? No, obviously not at all. Had another segment of the video where kid throws the video, kid throws the paper, little to the left. Throws the paper, little to the right. Throws the paper, nails it. You got it. Throws the paper, nails it. You got it. Throws the paper, nails it. You got it. The timeliness of feedback really has a strong bearing on how well learners correct their errors. Interestingly enough, there's a pretty strong research that shows that at least for academic learning, for book learning, delaying feedback by a day or two actually increases its effectiveness. The same research, though, shows that frustrates the bejesus out of students. They want feedback immediately. They want to know instantly whether they got it right or whether they got it wrong. So you kind of got to balance that. Now, for physical skills, you want to give immediate feedback, and that should be practiced by correct performance, preferably repeated several times. So I'm a guitar player, and I give myself feedback. I can tell if I'm learning something new, if I'm playing it right, or if I'm not playing it right. And so I get immediate feedback from having made the mistake, and so I slow down and try it again, and try it again, and try it again, and I make myself do it correctly 3 times in a row, maybe 5 times in a row. However, if the learner is making repeated errors, if they are not performing the task correctly time after time after time, take a break. Because one, psychologically, they're getting frustrated and they're getting upset. Secondly, they are practicing the error. They're getting better at making the mistake. So stop rehearsing the error. Take a break, take a breather, go do something different, come back to it later. You may need to slow down. You may need a different way of explaining how to perform the task. It all depends on what's being done. But the feedback is very, very important. So if you have the opportunity, build that into your classes. Sometimes it's absolutely natural. If you're teaching a cooking class, You can tell if it's chopped well enough. You can tell what color the roux is. You can taste if it's salty enough. Other classes, it may be a little more tricky. But bear in mind that performance and feedback is very important, because a crucial part of learning is making errors and then correcting them. And we'll talk about errors and correcting errors a little bit later. But practice is for students to make mistakes. You just don't want to rehearse the mistakes. So questions about feedbacks before we get into the next big chunk. Let me check the chat. All right, I don't see anything in chat. Bloom's taxonomies. Benjamin Bloom was a researcher in the mid-20th century who came up with lists, ordered lists of skills in three main domains, three main areas. Those are cognitive, that is the realm of knowledge and ideas; psychomotor, the realm of physical skills; and affective, not effective, affective, the realm of attitudes and emotions. What's neat about taxonomies is that they're extremely well known, and you can very easily find lists of observable and measurable verbs that match each of the levels. You just type it into Google and you will just get back page after page after page. Some may be more useful than others, but there's lots and lots of folks who have done lots and lots of work to map specific verbs to each of these levels of the taxonomies. And remember, a taxonomy is a structured, it's a structure of knowledge. It's an epistemological structure. So you see the triangle. And what this implies is that these tasks, remembering, understanding, applying, form a foundation for the tasks of analyzing, evaluating, and creating, which are at a higher level. So at the foundation, we call those underlying declarative knowledge. It's the lingo that I use in my business. Remembering. A is for apple. The molecular weight of a gas is dRT over P. IO4 is per iodic. The rank of Duke means that you have won the crown at least twice. So these are facts, and we'll talk about that. Understanding takes it a little bit to the next level. Applying takes it to the next level, where you're actually using these facts and the combinations of facts to solve problems. Analyzing starts to get into problem solving. We'll talk about problem solving, where you are figuring out what the components are, figuring out what the pieces are, how they fit together. Evaluating is making a judgment as to how well this thing works, how well these two ideas fit together. And then creating is sometimes called synthesizing or synthesis, and that's making something new. As George Carlin said, nail together two things that have never been nailed together before, and some schmuck will buy it from you. So there's links at the bottom. This is really a rabbit hole, and I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on this. I just want to acquaint you with the idea of cognitive taxonomy, because this will determine at what level you want your students to perform at. Do you simply want them to be able to state facts, or do you want them to be able to create something new that has never been done before? Or is it perhaps something in the middle that you want them to just be able to understand how 14th century French fashion influenced 15th century Italian fashion, if indeed it did at all. So this is the realm of knowledge and ideas. Skills, the psychomotor domain, has some really weird words. Complex overt response, mechanism, guided response. Fortunately, they've been translated, and these are in reverse order. At the bottom is perception. I see it. I am observing you do the thing. Next step is I'm ready to do the thing. I am prepared to pick a hammer and whack on hot metal. Guided response. Novice performance needs a lot of help, lots of trial and error, lots of feedback, lots of mistakes. That's okay. Most of us who are learning to do a new thing spend a lot of time here. In fact, a lot of us have to be convinced to get to this point. Be brave enough to suck at something new. Novice performance. You're not going to be very good at it. That's okay, because your instructor gives you lots of help with lots of practice. The next step up is a journeyman performance, which is essentially you can do the basics with confidence. You may not be creating anything new, you may not be creating anything particularly complex, but by golly, I can make a nail. By golly, I can make a tent peg. You know, I can flatten out a bar, and I can make a spoon. By golly, I can make a spoon. I can put a twist in, and I can do it safely. So basic skills, basic journeyman performance. You see this very much obviously in a lot of shop classes where the master or the shop steward will say, okay, trainee, you've been here 6 months, you know how to do X, Y, and Z, so here's a bunch of X, Y, and Z, go do it. So, all right, I can chop cabbage. I can chop cabbage with the best of them. Give me all the cabbage, I will chop all the cabbage. All right. I'm sorry, that's journeyman performance. Then there's expert level 1 and expert level 2. And where those divide is really going to be determined by the very particular thing that you're doing. Because where I draw the line with this in leather work is different from woodworking, is different from pyrography, is different from calligraphy, is different from illumination, is different from embroidery. So whatever it is that you're doing, there's the expert level 1 performance, which is, you know, that's pretty good. The expert level 2 is, that's really very good. And that's more than the level 1. And then finally at the very top is mastery, where you're doing new things and you're putting things together that were never put together before, and you're doing things in new and different ways, creating an original work that an expert would be hard pressed to tell didn't get dug up out of a bog somewhere. Like, by golly, wow, I didn't know that they actually had any of these back in the day. Well, actually they didn't. This is my own design, but it's based on, here's all my research. So that's the psychomotor. These are skills. Shire, barony, kingdom, laurel, yeah, maybe. That's not an unreasonable mapping. I wouldn't necessarily make that hard and fast, because I think we probably all know people that are performing at a mastery level that just simply haven't been recognized yet, and that's just part of the way our game works. Is how do you be a knight? Well, become a knight, and eventually, hopefully, the king will recognize you as a knight. But these are things, of course, that are aspirational. So if I want to be better at doing leather work, I mean, I'm a journeyman when it comes to leather work. I make stuff that is sturdy and useful and practical, but it's not particularly pretty because I don't have the skills at decorating, and I'm just, I just don't. So I might aspire to be able to, put some decoration on something. And I'm a member of the Facebook SCA Leatherworkers group, and boy, there are some people there that just absolutely wow. Now, there are folks that are performing at an expert level one because they're really, really good, but they're not coming up with their own patterns. They're using patterns that are created from somebody else. Then there are folks that are creating their own patterns, and they're amazing, and they work, and they're gorgeous. So you can see how these map onto various ANS stuff. Any level of skill can enter a Shire ANS. Yeah, pretty much. But we're not going to be talking about ANS criteria. Arts and sciences competitions, whole nother thing. Whole nother thing. Affective, the realm of attitudes and emotions and things like that. We don't typically, historically, have done a lot of this with the SCA. We see a lot of this at the college level, in sociology and other classes, critical thinking, where you're pushing people out of their comfort zones and getting them to think outside their little boxes. We don't really see a lot of this in the SCA, although it's starting to show up with diversity and inclusion, being aware of folks who are, non-gender conforming, or what's the word, neuroatypical. Just be aware that attitude and emotion is a definite component of learning. And there actually do exist formal structures that can help you build classes in these areas. And that, if you look up Bloom affective taxonomy, you'll get a whole bunch of responses. So, questions about Bloom. We're doing on time. Doing okay on time. Okay. Let's go through Fauché's Folly. I just pulled that name out of the air because I learned this structure from Rob Fauché, who was a mentor of mine back at Plato back in the 90s. And it's a really useful way of structuring information. And you can probably see how it maps to Bloom's cognitive taxonomy. I'm going to run through this pretty quickly. Facts, concepts, principles, procedures, and problems. Facts, concepts, principles, procedures, problems. Facts are things that are simply true. You teach facts with mnemonics. Humor might help. For example, the formula weight for the formula for the molecular weight of a gas, I learned in freshman chemistry a very long time ago. It's dRT over P. D is the density, R is rho, the gas constant, T is the temperature, divided by P, the pressure. dRT over P. Now, how do I know that? I have not needed to know that. I'm not a chemist. I don't teach chemistry. But I can't ever forget that the name of the formula for molecular weight of a gas is dRT over P. Why? Because my professor said that he had a cat named Molecular Weight. And what does a cat do in the litter box? It scratches dirt over P. And now you can't forget it either. Humor can help. Humor can be kind of tricky because not everybody gets humor the same way. Be advised of that. Facts usually exist in a structure of some kind. So you want to teach the structure explicitly, because if you don't teach it explicitly, the students guaranteed will come up with one of their own, and it will be wrong. It will be incomplete. It will be skewed sideways. It will have holes. So Figure out what the structure is and teach the structure, because the structure enhances retention and recall. Typical structures are the chain. So the alphabet. You have watch the little kid learn the alphabet. A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P. I've always wondered at what age do they figure out that L, M, N, O is more than one letter? Right? L, M, N, O. Facts can exist in a hierarchy, like an org chart. Facts can exist in a table, like the characteristics of herbs or metals or dyes, or the SCA award structure. So you've got a column for service and a column for martial arts and a column for ANS, and then hierarchical rows, from the AOA level to the grant level to the laurel level to the royal peer level. And then there may be networks of more complex things. But whatever it is, figure out what your structure is and teach the structure explicitly so the students have a way to fill it in. Concepts. Concepts are facts in relation to each other. So there's that structure again. It is very common to give students a table of characteristics and say, memorize table. Oh, that's awful. Give them a blank table and let them fill it in themselves with guidance and feedback. That gets back to Gagne, provide learning guidance, elicit performance, and provide feedback. Give them a blank table or a partially filled in table and let them fill it out themselves. Learning a concept is a discrimination task. It's sorting into buckets. It's one of these things is not like the other, especially with kinds of concepts. And there are two kinds of concepts. There are kinds of concepts and there are parts of concepts. Kinds of concepts are cat, dog, ferret, fish, mammal. So you're sorting things into buckets. The way you teach concepts is give lots of examples. And you focus on the critical attributes rather than the non-critical attributes. So if you're teaching the different eras of Viking art, you're probably not going to focus so much on the non-critical attributes of interlacing, because everything has interlacing. You're probably not going to focus on zoomorphic forms, because everything has zoomorphic forms. Rather, you're going to focus on the details of how do I tell Jellinga style from this other style. What are the details that I can tell the things apart? The way you do that is give lots of examples, and you start with far examples. Examples that really, really examp the thing you're trying to teach. So if I'm teaching you the difference between a car and a truck, I'm going to start with a VW Bug or a smart car, because there's absolutely nothing truck-like about that vehicle. And for trucks, we're going to go Peterbilt, we're going to go Mack truck, because there is nothing car-like about that. And I'm going to give you lots and lots of examples. And I'm going to vary the non-critical attributes. Because if every truck I show you is red, when I show you a red car, you're going to think it's a truck because it's red. So I'm going to show you lots of different colors, because the color is absolutely non-critical. And then I'm going to show you vehicles that are more truck-like, but they're still cars, and more car-like, but they're still trucks, until we get to the crossover, the SUV, the El Camino. Because now we need a new category. We can't sort it into this bucket or that bucket. It needs a bucket all of its own. And that's a very important thing. And you may want to have students do that. Now, in the context of an SCA class, you often don't have that kind of time. But think about that idea of sorting into buckets and, oh, by the way, do we need a new kind of bucket? I got all these kinds of purses, I got all those kinds of purses, and then I got some that are kind of in the middle, they're kind of hybrid. Maybe I need a third category. Parts of concepts are a lot simpler to wrap your head around. It's just how parts fit together. What are the components? What are the different parts of a scroll? What order do you create them in? What are the different elements of Commedia? What are the different parts of SCA legal armor? So parts of concepts. So these are concepts, facts in relation to each other. Principles. Principles are rules. They are concepts in action. If then, condition when. If X, then Y. Under condition A, we get X. Under condition B, we get Y. Under condition C, we get Z. Principles answer the questions. What happens if? Why did that happen? What happens if? Why did that happen? Which brings up failure points, because principles are usually things happening. And when things happen, things can go wrong. And so you can identify what happens if I leave the iron in the forge too long? Or, wow, look, it is sparking. Why did that happen? All right, why did the sauce break? Why did the milk curdle? Why did the eggs, instead of whisking smoothly in, separate? So the principles let you explain why and what happens if. And when you're looking, especially at procedures, we'll talk about that in a moment, that helps you identify the failure points where things can go sideways and how to recognize those and either prevent them or recover from them. So now procedures. Procedures are a how-to. They are steps in order, and there's that fact chain again. First we do this, then we do that, then we do this other thing. There are two kinds of procedures. There are rote procedures and meta procedures. A rote procedure you do the same way every time. You can almost think of it like a ritual. I do this the same way every time. Think of the most harmless thing you can possibly think of. And here comes the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man. So lighting a forge, you do it the same way every time. Reciting a poem, you do it the same way every time because the poem is the same. You may change things slightly, the way you emphasize little syllables, but you're going to recite the poem pretty much the same way every time. You're going to play the song the same way every time. So rote procedures, you do it the same way every time. Meta procedures, it changes. The basic principles don't change, but the specific execution does. So, if I'm cooking a roast, I may cook it an extra few minutes because the oven is a little bit cooler, or the roast is a little bit bigger. If I am making a sauce, I can't just set a robot to make the sauce because you gotta watch it. You gotta observe when it starts to bubble and then turn down the heat. So there's the steps in order. When this, do that. Telling a story. It's a little bit different every time I do it. It's not a recording. So here's the critical thing with procedures, whether it's a rote procedure or a meta procedure, recognizing and recovering from errors. How do I know that things are about to go sideways? That's huge. How do I recognize when things have gone sideways, and can I save it? Can I recover from the error? So think about these things as you're planning your class. Finally, problems. You learn all this stuff. You learn the facts, you learn the concepts, you learn the principles. Those are the underlying declarative knowledge that you use to perform the procedures, and you perform the procedures in order to solve problems. There are three kinds of problems: well-structured problems, moderately structured problems, and poorly structured problems. A well-structured problem has one or maybe a couple of solutions and one or maybe just a couple of solution paths. So adding 5 numbers, doing long division, tying your shoe, making lucette cord, just basic lucette cord, doing a chain stitch, writing the letter A in black letter. There's one outcome and one way to do it pretty darn much. That's a rote procedure. Moderately structured problems have several solutions, but not too many, and several, but not too many solution paths. I mean, the classic is use a barometer to determine the height of a building. Okay, well, the physics teacher wants you to use this formula, but I'm pretty clever. Instead of using the formula for the difference in air pressure, I'm going to drop it from the height of the building and time it and use the gravity formula. Or maybe I have a social solution. I go find the building superintendent and say, hey, dude, I will give you this really cool barometer if you will tell me how tall your building is. So those are solution paths that will give you the solution.
Excuse me.
And those are moderately structured problems.
I
David?
just wanted to let you know that got about 20 minutes till.
Yes.
Okay, just letting you know.
Thanks. I got my eye on the clock. We're actually doing quite well on time. Poorly structured problems. Poorly structured problems have many solutions, and some may be optimal, some may be less optimal. The same with solution paths. You have many solution paths, and some are better than others. We can do this the easy way, or we can do this the hard way. You have a pair of dry socks, I have a $50 bill and a knife. So, for example, a blacksmithing project may have many good solutions and many different ways of getting to that solution, but the path always involves the same basic processes and techniques. So it doesn't matter what kind of marvelous thing I'm going to make, I have to start the forge the same way. So these things do combine and they build on one another. Poorly structured problems, this maps to the top level of Bloom, which is, put it in the chat, I'll give you 10 seconds. Top level of Bloom, poorly structured problems. We're making something new here. Meta procedure, yes. Creating, that's right. Creating, synthesizing, making something new. That's typically what a poorly structured problem is. I want to make a new pouch, and I don't want to copy a design from Purses and Pieces. I want to design it myself based on historical examples, but I want to incorporate my own design elements. All right, that's expert level 2. That might be even mastery level. But it's a poorly structured problem. And that really is our goal. That's why we do what we do, is to work towards the ability to do that. At least those of us who have gotten bit by a bug for some particular thing, and we want to do that thing and go down the rabbit hole. Or, maybe we're just fine with solving well-structured problems. Give me a kit. I will make a pouch from a kit. I can do that. Or a moderately structured problem. All right, give me a pattern and help me pick out the fabric, and I will make this dress from this pattern. Versus, I'm going to research all of the different elements of this particular piece of costume, which is portrayed in these 15 different portraits, and make a spreadsheet of all the different kinds of buttons and all the different kinds of buttonholes and all the different kinds of necklines and all the different kinds of sleeves. And then I'm going to create something new that's kind of a synthesis of all of that. And that's what Melisande did. So, Fauché's folly, facts, concepts, principles, procedures, all that so that we can solve problems. Take a deep breath, ask questions. Okay. Let's look at kinds of classes. This is a kinds of, what was the word in Fauché's folly? Kinds of... Come on. Dee, 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 dee. Creating lecture, not fact. No, it's not a list of facts. It's a kinds of... The other kind of this thing is a parts of. So there's kinds of and there's parts of. And what is the overall term? Concepts. There we go. That's right. This is a kinds of concept, which means these are buckets. We're going to sort things into one of 3 buckets. And you may come up with another bucket. You may think of something that I didn't think of. But when I think of different kinds of classes that I've taken in the SCA, there's lectures, there's demonstrations, and there's hands-on classes. A lecture class might be the use of animal motifs in the Book of Kells. So it is a sharing of knowledge. That's what I'm doing today. I am doing a content dump. Bleh. I am the sage on the stage. I am sharing my knowledge. Ta-da! I am so smart. Look how smart I am. I'm going to tell you how smart I am. All these things I know. Better than that is, hey man, I went down this rabbit hole, and come with me down this rabbit hole and check this out. Isn't this cool? But the audience is largely passive. There may be Q&A. There may be Q&A. You ought to have pop quizzes. Why? In the chat, quick, why do you want to have a little pop quiz in the middle of your lecture, your chalk and talk, your PowerPoint? Why do you want to stop and ask a question? Reinforce ideas, retention, improvement, attention. That's right. It's the testing effect. That's right. You ask a little question, they'll remember it better later. So you may well have visual aids. You may be the visual aid. You may be wearing the thing you're talking about. Or you may have examples to pass around. So you might have samples of different textiles or different kinds of wool. So, all right, this is rabbit, this is Angora, this is goat, this is this kind of sheep, this is that kind of sheep. All right, here's cat hair. Be careful if you have an allergy. So different kinds of fibers. Here's flax, here's hemp, here's nettle, here's cotton. So you may be handing around physical examples. Right? That gets back to your learning objectives. What do you want the students to be able to do? If you want them to be able to handle a piece of cloth and have a guess as to what kind of fabric it is, then you may want to give them examples of fabric to handle so that they can feel the difference between wool and cotton and linen and polyester and vinyl. You may also have handouts, and we'll talk a bit about handouts momentarily. Demonstration classes. You're showing how something is done, but not expecting the participants to actually do it themselves. So I'm going to show you how I use woad, how I dye wool with woad. Here are the steps. Here are the materials. I'm not expecting you to do it because it's a 5-hour process, but here's, and by the way, in a demonstration, you may have visual aids, handouts, that show the different stages of doing things. So a bookbinding class. So here's all the pieces, parts. Here is the first step. Here is the second step. Here's what it looks like at the third step. So it's a demonstration, typically of a process, but you're not all going to walk out of here with a bound book. Or maybe you will, depends on how the class is set up. I've seen bookbinding classes that were demonstrations, that had examples, right? Here's what it looks like, or shoemaking classes. Here's what it looks like at this step, here's what it looks like at this step. And then there's other, like at a bodega, where you've got 2.5, 3 hours all morning. Okay, we're going to make a turn shoe. So online blacksmithing classes, online, Ike Brander's spear techniques videos, the hand sewing leather class that I did. So here's how to do this, but I'm not expecting you to do it. The key point is making the steps visible to the participants. So especially if you're doing an online video, watch a bunch of really good and really bad instructional videos online on YouTube, because there's some really good ones and there's some really awful ones. Like, what the heck are you doing? Right? Your hands are off camera. I literally can't see what you're doing. Or they've got a good camera setup, a good lighting setup, and it's zoomed in, it's close up, and I can see the angle you're putting the needle through. Oh, I get it. Slow down the action so viewers can follow and understand. So I'm doing this tricky spin thing, sword and shield. All right, let me do this in slow motion. And I might perform the task slowly, or maybe I cannot perform the task slowly, so I have to use video trickery to slow it down. But make sure that the students can follow and understand. And then handouts are great to show the step-by-step actions. Hands-on classes are different from demos. Demonstration is, here's how to do it. Hands-on is, hey, guess what? You're going to do the thing. They're actually going to perform the task. Now, they may not perform it very well. They're going to be at the novice task. They need a lot of guidance and feedback. If it's a fairly simple task, like making a wire-wrapped ring, they may be able to perform at a basic level after class on their own, maybe with reference to the handout. And again, looking at the ABCD condition, I have the materials, I have a handout that's illustrated that shows step by step. Typical kinds of classes that are hands-on are make and take. See a lot of this with kids classes, and that's fabulous. We're going to bake cookies. We're going to bake Ember Day tarts. And we're going to do it, and we're going to enjoy the products of our labor. So that is the learning objective, is these students will bake Ember Day tarts that are edible. A workshop, and Three Towers has the bodega, where you've got class that lasts all morning or all afternoon. You've got lots of time for practice and feedback. Lab classes, shop classes. We're going to learn the basics of playing harp. So everybody needs to bring a harp, and we're going to learn how to place our hands, how to place our fingers, and how to play the Dorian and Aeolian modes. Very often, hands-on things, you'll want to have a kit. So you may need to make a kit in advance, which means you may need to charge a fee to reimburse yourself for the cost of the kit. So, if I've got a yard of linen and a spool of thread and a bunch of needles, right? That may cost me a few bucks, and it's not unreasonable to ask the students to reimburse you for that, because after all, if they've got some skin in the game, then they're liable to be a little more engaged and a little more tracking what you're doing. So that's something to think about. Handouts are a great way for the audience to take you home with them. We'd love to take you home with us. We'd love to take you home. So handouts are a terrific thing. There are different kinds of handouts. So you may want to include illustrations. Be sure to cite your sources for the illustrations. Please make them legible. I have a handout from early on that I really need to fix because I found this really cool font online for Celtic text, and oh god, it's unreadable. You can't. It looks nice, but it's useless or nearly useless as a handout. Standard academic format, MLA or APA, is a good start. Make it legible. Use a 12-point font. Courier, no, not Courier, that's typewriter. Ugh, it's ugly. Times New Roman. Calibri is a good font on Windows because it's very legible on screen and it prints with a minimal use of ink, so it's friendly. Comic Sans, as it turns out, apparently is a little bit easier for folks with dyslexia to figure out because the B, D, and P lowercase look different enough that they're more easily distinguished than in Helvetica or Arial. Handouts are a great way to share references, and documentation can give you a jump start on your ANS documentation for your ANS entry. The question is, do you distribute it before or after class? See, there's a danger of distraction. Some of you grab the handout as soon as I posted it in the chat, and you're reading the handout instead of listening, which, is okay. If I can be replaced by a handout, I probably should be. You can have note-taking blanks. So the students are filling in the blanks as you are going through your presentation. That's a great way to encourage engagement and the students keeping track with what you're doing. Step-by-step instructions are great for hands-on classes like embroidery stitches, because I guarantee by the end of the day I can't remember what Zuriel was talking about with a chain stitch, but I got this handout with this picture of how to do a chain stitch. So now I have confidence that I can do it on my own. And here is a really neat idea for printed handouts. If you're handing out printouts in class, put a QR code on there. Not a URL, a QR code, because that way I don't have to type in this long funky URL. Just scan the QR code and that'll take you to the latest version of the handout online. And Signore Tommaso Franceschi, who by the way will be part of our panel discussion at 4 o'clock on professionalism and performance, shameless plug there, track 2 I believe. Yeah, put a QR code, that's terrific. So, when you're actually teaching the class, dealing with distractions, okay, you may have background noise. If you're outside, there may be wind or other things. Most ANS classes let you specify your needs. So for example, when I do the flax demonstration, it's messy, but it's dry. I don't have anything to mop up. I'm not going to have any wet spills, but there's a lot of stuff that's got to be swept up. So, if it's on a carpeted floor, I got to find, please let me know that there's a vacuum cleaner available. So if we're doing natural dyeing, well, got to do that outside. Well, you could do it in a kitchen, so long as there's no fumes to deal with. But, you got heat, you got wet. So be aware of that. There may be some safety issues. Sometimes you just have to manage the venue as best you can. Known World Cooks and Bards a couple of years ago, it was blazing hot. There was not a cloud in the sky. And so we were just trying to find shade anywhere we could. Sometimes you just got to manage as best you can. Finally, what happens if Master Knows More Than You shows up for class? Well, be respectful, but this is your class. If they wanted to teach the topic, they should have signed up to teach it. This is your class. So be respectful, but be firm. Put on your mommy pants or your daddy pants. I would be delighted to go down that rabbit hole with you, Master Knows More, after class. And I'm sure it'll help me for the next time I teach this, but I really need to respect the time of the folks who came to see me teach this class, so I need to stick to the agenda if you don't mind. I'll love to talk to you after class. Now, we were talking about handouts, and you go on. So, timing worked out really nicely. We have about 5 minutes for Q&A. I am going to post the link to the handout in the chat again. And feel free to unmute and ask questions in a popcorn format. And Dagrin, thank you for running the tech stuff. And I think I'll be happy with the recording of this. So if you want to stop the recording for Q&A or let the recording run through Q&A, feel free, and I'll shut up and listen to you guys.
Just a comment, really, based on some stuff that I've taught in the past. My wife and I have, in the past, have taught at a hobby level jewelry making school, and the week-long class that I taught was how to cut a faceted gemstone. And I used multiple ideas from basically what you just presented in that class on a regular basis. Things like I had a PowerPoint going automatically kind of on a cycle when people first came into the class. So, all right, here's how you get started. This is what you're going to learn. Boom, boom, boom. And then, of course, I was there to answer questions. I also have a display that has steps in the process to get there. It's like, okay, this is the first step. This is 7 to get to the finish zone. And I had a handout that had step by step how to do it. Well, kind of a. It's not exactly you do this, you do that. It was like that. These angles of these places on the stone is how you cut. So all of that works together. It's not just one thing or another. It's all of it as a system working together to do all of this stuff. Some classes you're going to have the time to really get into all of it. Sometimes you're not.
Excellent ideas. The rotating PowerPoint that's there when they come into class, that just kind of goes through the slides, is fantastic. Especially in a shop class, having step-by-step displays that they can get up on their own and go refer to, so that they may be able to self-correct themselves, and then maybe they go, Mr. Walker, I don't understand this.
And yeah, I'm there for help for like that too. I also have a computer program that shows the steps as they go. I had one student that needed that because it's like, okay, I got to the point that now this doesn't look like the example that you have here. What's wrong with my stone? And so I took him over to the computer and I progressed it around to the point where he was. I was like, what does that look like? He said, that looks like my stone. I said, okay. And I progressed it on around to finish that level. And it's like, you just need to finish the level.
And that's an excellent technique when you're teaching processes and techniques is, okay, here's your piece of work. Here's the example. What's the difference? And you shut up and let them answer the question. That actually is a sales technique. When if you're selling something, you ask a closing question. So, when would you like it delivered? Or would you like that in red or black? and then shut up, because the next person who speaks is the one who's taking action. So that's a terrific technique, and that's definitely 102 level, 202 level. But obviously, Davik, you're a natural at this, so I've been preaching to the choir. We are at time.